Well, thank you.
Very spot on.
We've got a lot of question and answers backed up, so if you guys want to kind of go through and upvote the questions you'd rather have me deal with, go right ahead. And I have to find out where I left off last time because we do have quite a few. That's my own fault.
Can I upvote my own?
Sure, as long as you only do it once. Let's see, how far back are we? Oh, there we are. What's that? We're live on YouTube now. Oh, okay. Thanks, Rick. Welcome to the Friday Discord question and answer. I usually bring an extra computer in here so I can monitor myself on YouTube, but I don't have that computer in my office right now. So Rick just let me know that we are in fact live. So that's good. We get together almost every Friday morning at this time. And why do I do this on Discord? And today, in fact, I can't even see the comments on YouTube. I do this on Discord because I want to have a little higher level of conversation if that's possible. And I also want to give the people, I try to, just this week again, someone sent me an email and I the problems with hierarchies is that they bind and blind, and I have difficulty finding time to have conversation with everyone and do justice to my local church and do justice to my family and all of that. And so the Discord for me is an important place to point people to because there's commonalities in my audience. People have similar questions about atheism or Christianity or a whole variety of subjects, and the Discord server is a place where there's a high concentration of people talking about and thinking about and discussing the issues that I discuss on my channel. So that's why I point people to them. But you're more than welcome to keep watching from the YouTube stream. That's fine. After the stream, I usually go back and review the chat just to get a sense of what's going on. You're more than welcome, of course, to come into the Discord server. Rick acts like he's me in the YouTube chat, and we'll usually drop the link in. Joey's not around today to sort of monitor things, so Rick has to do double duty watching the YouTube live stream and tracking down open mics and things here on the Discord server. So
Paul, I'm here to do the open mics for Joey.
oh, thank you, Cassidy. I really appreciate that, and I'll thank you on behalf of Rick too, so he can focus on the YouTube side of things. I've got through every fault of my own a good backlog of questions that have built up again in the queue. So so if there are questions that you like more than others, upvote them. And so if, in fact, sorry for those that I might skip, if in fact I skip over some, that this way I'll have a sense of all of you in the Discord server, which questions you'd like me to focus on. So, but I will begin with the question that I ended last time with Le Tenturier. Gosh, if I knew French and Latin, my life would be so much easier. I discovered Jonathan Peugeot through this discussion with Rationality Rules. Since that day, I've immersed myself in this echo chamber and discovered Vervaeke, Holland, yourself, and others. In my experience, I think you are the one who makes the best sense of the meaning crisis. Well, thank you. I listened today, the live show, and your development of the inside-outside distinction. That's from 2 weeks ago. I wanted to ask this question. Is it possible for someone to have their inside being the outside? I think that's transparency. I was, I social medias favor transparency and the spontaneous and the unguarded because we are having such a difficult time making sense of the world because of all of the motivated systems. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about the difference between the kind of input we get looking at a rainforest and the kind of input or information we get in our highly connected systems today. Now, whereas in terms of, let's say, the amount of information from both a rainforest and, let's say, a Twitter feed, one might argue by virtue of the limitations of the eyes and the limitations of time and space, we receive exactly the same amount of information. If you want to reduce information into packets, the packets we receive via Twitter are very different from the packets we receive in the rainforest. Both have too much information for us to manage, but the information from a Twitter stream is peopled, and people change the packets, okay? Part of how we're trying to deal with that is we, unlike any other creature we know, we watch each other think, and we anticipate the thoughts and moves and decisions of others. That's why we can't game the stock market, because the stock market is always watching itself. That's why we can game a dog, we can game a cat, we can game a natural ecosystem, because it's not self-conscious or self-aware to the degree that we are. So part of why I think we're valuing the inside perspective, which we look at as transparency or authenticity in our human networks, is because we know that we are putting on masks, we are playing games, we are fulfilling roles. Part of what makes Jordan Peterson so fun to watch in this moment, and Tom Holland too for that matter, in this moment in terms of where they stand on a pretty important label, which is Christian or not Christian, is because they are doing, at least to one degree or another, they're processing externally. They are trying to let their insides show. I do that on my own channel. I just had Twitter is a cesspool. I can't give it up. I can't. Can I give it up? I don't know. Am I an addict? I don't know. But Twitter tends to put us in a place where there's a lot of mixed signals, but it's also a place where inside and outside sort of continue to show. So even though that distinction, inside outside distinction, is a very important one, because we are self-aware and self-conscious both as individuals and as systems, it isn't the final word on things. And that's a big part of the meaning crisis. As you know, I read that introduction to that book that Lewis wrote, and it's very interesting for me because Nate pointed out on Wikipedia some background of the author, and I can sort of see why this is not one of the more famous writings by Lewis because of what it's attached to, which didn't quite go the way Lewis went. So this is sort of where we're at. I mean, we're always looking for an aspect that can finally govern. And so, okay, well, now we're aware of the inside-outside dynamic. So maybe that's the aspect that can finally govern. And so we push it up the hierarchy with words like, he's so authentic. I'm looking for the authentic. And in some ways, authentic then maps onto naive. But in this postmodern, self-conscious age, the naive is seldom simply naive. That sounds terribly esoteric. For example, you mentioned that the outside recount of a specific situation, you talked about observing an enamored couple from the outside, is boring or unfulfilling. and that we all, in different degrees, want to experience love ourselves from the inside. That's right. And here's the thing. I remember falling in love at college, and I remember the feeling of falling in love. And I remember, wow, I had never felt like this before. And that falling in love experience is with the woman who is now my wife. I think both my wife and I look back at those years and on one hand treasure and appreciate the feeling of falling in love. But it's different now because we've been married 30, going on 33 years. That's where this stuff gets interesting because on one hand, falling in love is so much fun. But falling in love, unlike a sitcom or a Hollywood romantic movie, falling in love is not the rest of the story. But is it possible to experience fulfillment from the outside? I don't think so. I think you have to be inside. You can see fulfillment. You can represent fulfillment, but I think we all long to be on the inside. And this gets at, again, if you read a lot of Lewis on this, why is the church female and Christ the male? We long to be ravished by him. Now, in the meaning crisis, all ravishings are, the curtain is pulled back on all ravishings and say, no, it's just code. And the Matrix represents that with all those little green screens. And I think the person in the movie The Matrix who best exemplified that was Cypher. And again, look at his name. I mean, that movie is so full of symbolism. Cypher. Cypher meets with the agents and goes to the steakhouse and says, I want to be plugged back into the Matrix. I look at this piece of steak and I think it's only code, but I want to live it from the inside. I want to know it from the inside. And so put me back in, make me rich, make me powerful. I think that little movie scene beautifully illustrates this dynamic. I mean, if you interview people in the corridors of MIT, you find people whose inside telos is to obtain the outside understanding of reality, and then even sometimes think not very fulfilling to participate in romantic relationships and reject most of the cultural codes and cultural expectations, right? And what's ironic about that sort of mastery, that really smart mastery that leads up to the meaning crisis, where we sort of sit back with our arms folded like that really smart 13-year-old and say, it's just code. And some of the older ones among us look at them and say, they've never really fallen in love, have they? They have no real understanding of the power of the inside. And was it a Joni Mitchell song? I understand from both sides now. That gets at this. So part of why we want the outside is because, especially in our cultural context, we believe the outside is more real, more controlling. In a sense, the whole romantic movement sort of gave that perspective the finger and said, screw you and your pretenses at mastery and your assumed monarchical vision. I want to be ravaged. I want to be loved. I want to fall in love. I want to live in the movie. I want to live the dream. Put me back in the Matrix. And so that's, I think, in a lot of ways where we're at. And postmodernity plays a really interesting part in this tale because sometimes postmodernity adopts the posture of a really smart 13-year-old and says, "Ha! There's no narratives. It's all outside." I mean, in some ways, postmodernity is the meaning crisis. But in other ways, postmodernity basically says, okay, so it's all meaningless. Let me jump in and be totally meaningless in a way that completely benefits me in whatever aspect I desire to highlight. So that it's in that way that postmodernity fails to become a coherent system and actually fails to deliver. And it's, as C.S. Lewis notes, it's just a solvent that continues to solve. The purpose of a solvent is not to continue to dissolve something. The purpose of the solvent is to get the rust and the crud off the metal and have it shine like the sun. Well, where is the sun? Well, he is the sun. We are the moon. It's a very old Christian story. So there's a little riff for you. It was only 15 minutes. That's not too bad. Any comments or follow-ups from the voice chat? Okay.
Wait, hold up, hold up.
Oh, by the way, Job says hello. He sent me a message and he misses all you guys. So when he's done with his fast, he'll be back. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, what is this? I'm new here. What's going on here?
Oh, you are talking to a few dozen people right now. And I am answering questions that are in a channel above the voice channel called Questions for PVK. And I usually answer a question and then I pause in case someone wants to say, "Oh, Paul, you're full of shit." And because that's usually a pretty helpful thing for me to hear because sometimes I am. And pastors shouldn't use words like that, but sometimes I do. So that's what we're doing here.
I see. What would be your advice for the incel community? People who can't find love, who are
Yeah.
just fucked.
Don't give in to bitterness.
That's it.
That's not a small thing. if you
Oh
can
God.
if you can manage that, it may very well resolve the incel problem because women when it so my wife is if you were to rate my wife on an attractiveness scale compared to me, I married, James mentioned this last week, I married way above my pay grade. There's no question about it. One
I
of the
don't
things
doubt
that
it,
I had
sir.
to learn in that was men value physical attraction, beauty, very, very highly. Women are, in some ways, a bit more, let's say, enlightened when it comes to their mates. They've got some hierarchies they're looking at. But I'll tell you what is attracted to women: a smart, generous, secure, reliable man. If you can become those things, you may very well find a woman who would love to be your partner. And if that's the case, you'll likely no longer be celibate.
I appreciate that advice, but
It's
I
a
don't know,
tall
man.
order.
I feel like it's like things have changed, man. Like I don't doubt that you married, above your pay grade, but you grew up in a different time.
Yep.
Like now, like women are independent. Like they have all feminism, independence. They make their own money. They don't need to find a beta provider, and they just kind of now they're free to actually pick the guys they're attracted to. And now that leaves a lot of men like me in the dust. And I wish I grew up in your time, because I know I wouldn't be where I am if I grew up in your time.
How old are you?
I'm 23.
Oh, you're
Gonna be
just getting
24
started.
in a couple weeks.
I didn't, I got married when I was 25. How old was I when I started? I wasn't much older. I wasn't much younger than you when I had my first serious relationship. I, historically, men often wouldn't marry until their 30s because they needed to demonstrate in cultures far more difficult than ours, they needed to demonstrate their competency. So I totally understand the fact that at your age, your testosterone hasn't started to decline, buddy,
I gotta go.
and this is frustrating as hell for you. I get that, but take all of that frustration and pour it into your own self development. Work on, and this is where bitterness is really the enemy. And one of the most amazing things about Peterson and him talking about his last year with all of this pain, he was exactly right when he said, the one thing I can't do is get bitter. Because if you succumb to bitterness, you're done. And so I appreciate the fact that you have dreams and we live in an instant gratification society, but most men aren't marrying until their late 20s or early 30s. And I went into my marriage a virgin. So I don't see, at least within a Christian frame, there's nothing shameful about that. In fact, that's what we're looking for. So I would say, what's my advice as a Christian minister? I would embrace Jesus. I would get into a Christian community. I would work on competencies. I would always look at bitterness as an enemy. I would find ways to move yourself up the hierarchy in terms of, I don't care if your job has a really low ceiling, you work in a trade or something like that. Be the best, whatever it is you do, among your peers. And if you keep doing that, women will pay attention. Because I deal with the meetup, which my meetup is mostly guys. My wife was away at a friend's thing, and there were a whole bunch of women that she knows that were in their early to mid 30s, and all of these women who were very attractive, very competent women were complaining about how they couldn't find men. Well, maybe they're shooting a little high, that could be, but women want men and men want women. That hasn't changed. So if you become a really quality man, a woman, and probably more than one woman will want you. So don't give in to bitterness. Keep working on yourself. Be the best person you can be in the environment you live. And generally speaking, it'll happen. They'll find you. It's not easy, and that's why I think, that's why I advise people, just like Peugeot does, find a church, join a church, get together with men, learn from men. Men love to teach each other competence. Your tribe will build you up. Find a tribe that will build you up.
I mean, touching on the feminist stuff, is it possible, Paul, that in sort of a Peugeotian way, that in the next couple of years or so, there will be a cultural snap back into more traditional, a way of the later men and women. Men and women, because it is sort of irregular right now. But both Peugeot and even Peterson, when he talks about how efforts in Scandinavia to equal out gender differences only made the traditional roles reinforce themselves. Is it possible that if you take the time now to put the work in, that in the next couple of years it will really bear fruit?
We can hear you though.
Oh, according to that script, we shouldn't see church plants that don't affirm women serving in church office. I've seen plenty of those. And I talk to men and women who used to be progressives, and they tried it and they said, I don't like it. It doesn't work. I know I know a guy who really struggled to find a woman, and eventually he did. And they got married, and their marriage was a mess. And they were both sort of garden variety evangelicals. The thing that changed their marriage for the better is they adopted a more traditional position on headship. And I know this is heresy for certain parts of the CRC and friends of mine, and this has not been a position that I've promoted, but for that marriage, his wife basically decided she was going to practice submitting to him, and he was going to practice laying down his life for her. And it really helped them straighten out their marriage. Before this transformation in their marriage, he was unwilling to have a child with her. She very much wanted a child, but he was unwilling to have one because he said, I don't want to bring a child into this marriage that may very well be heading to divorce. Before I'm willing to bring a child into this marriage, I want us to be stable. And the way they found stability was a more traditional pattern of marriage. I suspect that as we go into the future, demographically, it may well look like the two groups that really practice serious marriage are the very rich and the very religious. If you look at the history of marriage, it makes sense. For many years and many places, common law marriage, as we talk about it today, was generally the rule. It was often the church and other institutions that really reinforced marriage socially in the society. Now, were there problems with that? Absolutely. Marriage is not easy. The problem with human beings is that there are problems with all of our supported solutions. Are there problems with traditional takes on marriage of male headship and patriarchy? Absolutely. But there are problems with the other side too. And I think we're going to see, I mean, the crazy thing about the Jordan Peterson IDW thing has been not so much the likes of Ben Shapiro, who's a conservative, it's the likes of Peterson and the Weinsteins and Sam Harris. These are liberals who are looking at the consequences of certain forms of progressivism and saying, can we at least acknowledge some of this stuff isn't working? Can we acknowledge that some of this new stuff isn't working while we still say some of the old stuff didn't work well too? Can we have honesty on both sides? So someone would quick to jump in and say traditional marriage didn't work. True, often. Contemporary marriage doesn't work. Marriage doesn't work. You got anything better? I haven't seen it. So I tend to think we are going to see that this is part of the reason conservatism doesn't go away. Because some old things are still here because they're durable. And I don't really consider myself a conservative, socially, politically, but others certainly would because I'm more conservative than them. So I'm, in that sense, classic IDW. And when Peterson is talking about things, social issues that sound very conservative or traditional, it's because he's pointing out that there are biological, sociological, even dare we say natural law-ish reasons for the patterns that we see. And if you close your eyes to those realities, you've sort of wandered off in some very strange way into a new religious fundamentalism that doesn't really want to take account of reality. But most of us live in the real world, and if you're a man and you're attracted to women, you would like to at least pursue the consummation of that attraction. And if you're a woman who would like to have a family and be partnered to a man who's going to be responsible and faithful and loyal and a partner in raising children, these things aren't going away. And so, no, you're right. These, Richard, it's part of the reason for everything we're seeing right now. Cassidy, I want to get what is your take on the incel thing?
My take.
Yeah. You're you're a young single woman who is not shy about her opinions. What do you think?
Well, I think there's a variety of reasons you're saying it. I think there's a part of it that's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy where it's like, oh, nobody wants to be with me, and then it just like tumbles into this thing and it just becomes a bigger part of someone's identity. I think part of it is not treating women well, like treating women like they deserve to be with you. Or like they're or trying to like trick them into liking you or something instead of being authentic and vulnerable and like genuine. But I don't know, it's hard to say. I think there's a lot of reasons and it really depends on the individual, but I think we've sort of lost a little bit of chivalry, but we've also lost a little bit of like women. Like women are incredibly independent now, and so they sort of like And I can say that being a woman who's incredibly independent. I think sometimes we tend to walk all over people, and we get this perception that, all men want is sex, and, you know, there's like, we're not going to waste our time and be treated poorly. Like there's this weird expectation of that sometimes. And so I think it's a two-sided problem, but it just depends on the individuals. But yeah, I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It does. It does. Would you agree that um would you rather have a really physically attractive man who's a rake and a philanderer, or a less attractive man who is faithful and reliable?
Oh, less attractive. I always say anybody too good looking, I don't trust.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think for most women and women who are looking for long-term commitment in marriage, it's much more about character than about physical attractiveness. Of course, you want to find your partner attractive, but I think a lot of times for women, the 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 more that you show that you're a person of character, and the more that you show that you like respect the relationship and want to grow in that and are vulnerable, the more attractive a man can become.
That would be that's what I hear from women. So, anybody else on this subject before we move on?
I have to say, just because people say something doesn't mean it's true. And
That's true too.
a lot of women say they want vulnerable, nice guys, and that's not who they end up with.
That's true too.
That is true, but I think sometimes this idea of like vulnerable nice guy can it isn't always as clear. Like, and I talked to Andrea about this on my podcast once, where it's like, it's the nice guy. They do all of the things that are supposed to be nice, but it's really this manipulation to try to get you in a relationship. It's not really about treating a woman as a person with respect and agency, and like, wanting the best for somebody. It's wanting the best for them as long as you're with them, and then dropping them when they're not. And so it becomes this thing. And I do think it depends on the woman you're talking to, but there are times we can trick ourselves into believing we want something and then ending up with something else. But I think a lot of times on both sides that ends up coming from pain or past experiences, or just
Yeah, and can I add something?
No. Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna like okay, so that's the thing. Don't use I wouldn't use the word nice guy. Like I would say kind and compassionate, and like which is like more active in my opinion, rather than like I'm just nice. I just am nice. I'm a nice person. It's like, well, like kind, like showing kindness to those more vulnerable than yourself, like that's a man of great worth, like those are the kinds of things that women are drawn to, are like men who are kind to children and kind to the vulnerable. And like that's something that I mean, it can be cultivated, but it's just something that saying nice vulnerable is a little bit ambiguous. uh, it doesn't have to be like vulnerable, like here's my whole pain and difficulty laid bare. It's more, I am secure in who I am. Like you can be being humble in knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, not putting on that grandiose mask of like I know what I'm talking about. What are you vulnerable? What is like, it's like being aware and open about things that you are um you know uh, not the best at perhaps, and also in the right time. You don't have to be vulnerable right away, but
Okay,
it's just sort of
I,
yeah.
I just have to push back on this idea that, oh, look, it's not about just the nice guys not being competent enough. A lot of us look around and we see women with men we know are the 50 Shades of Grey pirate fantasy, rakish guy getting a lot of women. And for a lot of us, it's like, I could act that way, and yes, I actually know I would be a lot more successful than actually being honest and authentic. And I refuse, but um, I'm sorry, it's just not true. Yes, not all women, and yes, the more intelligent women. Like, if my sister ended up with one of these guys, I would beat him up first, right? And no, she's not with one of these guys. But there are plenty of women who are with guys who are precisely that 50 shades horrible.
Well, I'm talking about those women though, Jacob. Like I'm talking from my own experience, and the man who I married is the kind of man who was kind, who is like who is okay with vulnerability because he's like, yeah, I'm not the best at this or I am the best at that, and I trust the word. Like there's no bravado, there's no mask. It just he he just is comfortable in who he is. That's who I married, and I'm going off of my own experience. Maybe I should have explained that first.
Well, and just to be on Jacob's side, I think there is something within culture that it tells women that that's the kind of thing that they should search for, or that there's like an attractiveness to those things. And I think it's in the same side of like what culture and like media tells men what they should be looking for in relationships. And so I think there becomes this thing narrative in our head that that's what all women are like, that's what all men are like, when in reality, I don't think that's actually true. I remember in the meme channel or something, somebody put a meme that said, all men want is one thing and it's disgusting. And then it was the little sad Pepe frog with like a family and a house. And it's and so that's like the truth. I think like for women, we think men are hypersexualized and all they want is sex. And like that's what we're seen as, and that's what we have to give in order to be loved and be in a relationship. And then on the other side, men think all women want is the smooth talking, like hot guy. And in reality, I don't think either of those things are actually true. Of course, there's going to be outliers and people who play into the narrative and accept something that they think they're supposed to want and end up being unfulfilled by that. But there's a whole medium where people are not buying into that and are understanding that that's not actually the truth of what men and women really want. And yeah, as far as the incel thing goes, I think there's this question of like, oh, well, I'm the only one not having sex. I think there's a lot more people not having sex than we think. We just
That's
get it
certainly
in our
true.
head that everybody is.
Yep, that's certainly true. And there's even a bigger group of people who are having sex and this is a huge area. And in terms of, you only need one other person, which means that there are, and as guys, we sort of see the women that are like, yeah, they're really hot and they're really all that and they're really out there. And then at some point the guys say, but do I really want that kind of woman? what am I gonna have to spend to keep this woman happy? What are her values? So it's a big deal.
Can
All
I just
right.
add something really quick? Can I just add
Yes.
something?
Yes.
So I don't know if that guy is in here anymore who asked the question,
No,
but
he seemed to have left.
yeah, if he happens to somehow end up listening to this, I think his question sort of betrayed something that's a more insidious problem, because he asked, what do we do to help incels, or what can we say to incels? And this idea of incels, it's always bothered me ever since I found out what that term even meant. It indicates to me that there's and this is widely known, there's a lack of proper male models for youth to model themselves after. And what I would suggest to him is to just try and find a model that he can at least begin to try to imitate, if anything. So to find some physical, real instantiation of like the guy that he believes he would have to be in order to have the woman that he desires. Ideally, not being, some guy from Jersey Shore or something like that, but the fact that he was in this chat for whatever brief amount of time he was in here indicates that I think he's legitimately searching. So,
Yep.
Yeah, I pray that he finds somebody, not just like in a movie or some celebrity, but somebody in his actual proximity to where he lives, some person in his life that he can begin to talk to and try to just take little steps towards, like Jordan Peterson says, like compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is, right? So
Yep.
if he can just start making baby steps towards, maybe even not even focusing on getting a relationship, but just think, if he could just imagine, what would I have to be like to be perfectly content being alone?
Yep.
If he could somehow find a model for that, that's, I think, what he needs most.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. That was my experience as well.
Yeah.
The problem could be that that model's supposed to be our own families, but I mean, I'm speaking from my experience, and me and my partner often sit down and go through all our friends, and all of us come from divorced or separated family units. So we're getting this ideal from culture and not from our own immediate home life experience.
Yeah.
And that inevitably becomes a hypersexualized Hollywood ideal, because they're trying to hack our kind of biology. Thank you. What was it? Edward Bernays' Century of the Self? Anybody? But this Freud's nephew, who got involved in marketing in the 50s in America and realized that he could use Freud's sexual theory to market all media.
Yeah.
So breakdown of the family, ideal family comes from media, hypersexual, biology, and so it goes.
Yeah. 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 And hence we have an antithesis where we try to be a community that does things differently, that looks around and says, we want to value different things than from what the media says. So these things go round and round. Great. See, this is exactly why I want to do this in Discord, because you guys can make points and have a degree of authenticity that I can't match because I'm only one person. A community is always stronger than the individual. So these are great points. This is a great discussion. I really appreciate it.
I'm gonna throw this out there too. I'm gonna disagree with what Christian said, and I don't think that person who asked the question was legitimately looking. I'm calling him out. I don't think he was looking for an answer. He was looking for comfort in the answer that he already found. And if he stays in that mode, he's gonna be bitter. He's gonna be angry, and it's never gonna work out for him. There's no version of doubling down on bitterness that would lead you to being happy. It's double negative does not equal positive in this case. And my best advice would be clean your room, both literally and figuratively. Basic hygiene, which is something that a lot of people still ignore these days, and find at least one physical activity that you don't even have to enjoy it, but do it regularly. And that would go a long way to solving a lot of these so-called, self-identified incels problems. And one more thing I'll say is something that our server, this corner of the internet, the IDW in general, we're very into our own intellects. I am, a lot of people on this server are, and turns out, unless you're the absolute top 1% of 1% of intellectuals, it's not actually that attractive of a hobby. It's not actually that attractive of a way to meet people of the opposite sex. So find other hobbies, find other communities. That doesn't mean give this up. That doesn't mean don't find value from it, but you're not going to mathematically find the answer to this problem. This is not a scientific problem. This is a social problem for yourself. And, maybe if you want to put it in a scientific context, you need to experiment more and listen to the feedback. Whatever you're doing right now is not working. Try something else, do something else, see if it works. And if it doesn't, keep going. One foot in front of the other.
Or even just stop trying. Just let it happen. Sometimes we look so much that it becomes diminishing returns, I guess. I mean, I met my girlfriend at a crazy house party when I pretty much given up on life, and neither of us ever imagined that we were going to be the type for each other, and we've been together 7 years. So, and you know, God has a weird way of just plonking you in weird situations, and just sometimes you got to just stop pretending that we're the master of this whole universe and that we can decide how things happen.
Hey, Joey, I believe you can be seeking and just not have reached your rock bottom to the point where you need to look, either within and take a good self-examination. I think you can still be seeking, just not, you can be right in the middle of your mess and not understand it.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of great advice. I think it's really good stuff.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah, go ahead. You asked the first question.
Yeah, I'm the one who wrote the question that you were answering.
Yep.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question. I mentioned the people in the corridors of the MIT, and you answered basically they're 13-year-olds who were never in love.
Not all of them, for sure. Maybe some of them. That's an attitude. So continue, because you're right. In a sense, I probably mischaracterized or represented. So please follow up.
Yes, that's what I wanted to bring up. Like in the corridors of the MIT, of course, you have younglings, but you also have 60-year-old professors that never engaged in romantic, and you have all the Asperger's, and you have all the schizophrenia spectrum, and all these people that literally don't feel any fulfillment from any kind of social interaction, or these people exist, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's all a matter of spectrum. So you might be far off, or you might be almost normal in a way. And what I wanted to ask is, for these people, that's the last sentence of my question. For these people, Christianity is proposing a solution to a problem they don't have.
Or at least a problem they don't see they have. The irony of, let's say, someone who is 60 years old and they might be on the Asperger spectrum, they might have an extremely high IQ, is that society, by rewarding them and sending them to MIT and giving them labs and academies and context, there is an inside to that academy, and it's a status inside. It's a status hierarchy that they have done very, very well in. And that's a wonderful thing. And society has rewarded these people because they have been useful for certain aspects of society's development. They have developed the computers, they have done the physics, they have done the math, they have done all of that, and they've been rewarded from it. So there's an inside to that status reward too, that probably they want to continue to enjoy. And one might say, well, Christianity seems to propose a solution to a problem they don't have. That could very well be. But my guess is, it was really interesting to me that the incel question came right on the heels of this question. and I can't necessarily connect those dots, but it doesn't seem like they're in different universes.
I'm not familiar with the concept of incel.
Oh, incel is someone who, basically a guy who can't get a girlfriend. That's the heart of it.
Okay.
And you can't get a girlfriend often, as a lot of the women here have said, because the guy doesn't have any social skills. The guy doesn't know how to talk to a girl. He might be able to do physics and do all kinds of things, and the reason I answered him with respect to bitterness is, and I agree with what Joey had to say, a lot of the people that I've known, when I see them complaining about being an incel, or maybe it's a MGTOW, men going their own way, they're bitter. And bitterness is a prison locked from the inside. And in that way, it's very close to hell. So, but no, Christianity is a funny thing. But I really, I take your point here. There are a lot of people that look at it and say, I don't need anyone else. My system and my way and this system is working just fine. Well, okay. They're also dependent on that system continuing to work in that way. And almost every human system breaks down at some point. So,
Hey, Paul, I have sort of a follow-up question that's sort of like a pivot from this. I don't know
okay,
if I can ask it, but like,
sure.
so recently there's been a lot of like deconstructing of like the purity culture and sort of that voluntary celibacy that many millennials and Gen Z sort of grew up being told to like adopt, and them finding sort of negativity through the acceptance of some of those beliefs and the way they were taught.
Mm-hmm.
How do you like? What's your perception on that, and how do you see sort of that that criticism that's starting to emerge?
Say a little bit more about it. Flesh it out a little bit more, or give me an illustration.
So there's a lot of people. I think Joshua Harris is like the biggest example of, he used to be this huge idol in the purity culture, wrote the I Kiss Dating Goodbye, and
Yeah.
now he's created a documentary saying that he wished he'd never taught all of those things. He's renounced his book, stopped it from printing. But there's other people who are still within the purity culture, who are like Julie Slattery, who's sort of looking to reframe sort of the perspective on that, and not throwing away the ideals, but sort of restructuring it to help people understand the why behind it, besides just the action of staying pure.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of like conversations, a lot of people who are sort of more on this edge of like talking about how harmful the purity culture was, and how it created a fear of intimacy, and a fear of failure within the sexual realm, that made it sort of debilitating for them to either like participate well in a relationship, or even some of these people from actually ever, finding a partner or getting married.
Yeah.
I just wonder what your perspective of some of that stuff is.
One of the things that I heard in Jordan Peterson's first biblical series lecture, that I thought he got exactly right, and it came up again in his Peugeot talks now. That which is at the top of the hierarchy needs to be outside of this world in a certain sense. Purity cultures are difficult because purity is a good thing. And holy, holy, holy is almost a definition of purity. Woke ideology is a purity culture. And we see that again and again. I just have the inner troll in me enjoys clipping articles that find that NPR is racist. And you will find in the bluest, wokest parts of the United States a continual demand that they're not woke or pure enough. And this is part of Benjamin Boyce's experience at Evergreen. And it's, I think Peugeot has exactly the right metaphor in terms of it's parasitic. Purity, like a solvent, I've used the solvent in terms of postmodernity, is a really good thing, but it's not an ultimate thing. Not in this age, not in this world. I love the story of John 4, of Jesus talking to the woman at the well. And you can find this on my church YouTube channel. When I did that story with my adult Sunday school class, in one of the lessons, I highlighted the romantic tension and even sexual tension between Jesus and the woman at the well. Based on Jesus' comment, I know this is a debated issue. I wouldn't say that the woman that Jesus meets at the well is a poster girl for purity. Okay? Part of where Christian purity culture goes wrong is it takes a good thing and makes it an ultimate thing. And it makes sort of an idol of it. And it offers a, in a sense, a false promise to the young men and young women who are simply haven't lived long enough to understand the complexities of what they're getting into. The false promise is this: as a reactive to the sexual revolution of the 60s, the purity culture doubles down on common religiosity, which says, here is this mechanism by which all of your dreams can come true. If you wear your virgin promise ring, if you save yourself for marriage, if you, basically keep doing all of these things, then if you play by all the rules, then after you finally cross that threshold of marriage, you'll have the greatest sex in the world, marriage will be easy, everything will be wonderful. That's a false promise. Now, it's also true, and actually last week James posted this in the text chat room alongside of this. It's also true that, generally speaking, having more sexual partners before marriage complicates marital sex. Both of those things are true. That the purity promise is a false promise, and the way of purity has some validity, but you can oversell that. And so, Joshua Harris canceled himself. Where's the outrage? Why can't I get his book anymore? Religious people make idols, and religious people usually, in the heat of a culture war, make idols with which to assault their rivals. And that's, in a sense, what happened with Christian purity culture. Oh, we're going to respond to the sexual revolution. Okay, let's just turn the knob way up on purity. Well, they got exactly what you would expect. Lots of people, God bless them, were virgins going into marriage. Good for them. They avoided the pitfall of, the other way, but then they discovered that they were given an idol, and the idol was purity. No, it's not. It doesn't work that way. And the same thing's happening on the other side with the woke stuff. Is NPR racist? In some ways, probably. Everyone and everything is. In some ways, probably, to one degree or another. That's why I'm a Calvinist. When I did a conversation with Mr. Reagan, he asked me if I was a bigot. I said yes. And he looked at me like, what? I says, I'm a Calvinist. I'm a bigot. I'm a sexist. I'm all these things to one degree or another. Those things inhabit me. And I need to resist them. But at least in this dispensation, I won't be pure. So no one going into marriage is pure. And if you make purity an idol, that idol, what idols reliably do is betray their worshipers. That's what an idol is. So do you want to chastity? Okay, let's use a different word. Chastity is a enduring Christian goal. It's a good goal. Pursue it. Will you fail it? Almost definitely. So Jesus pretty much says, doesn't mean it's a bad goal, but we also live with a Savior who forgives sins. And so whether you entered the marriage chaste and pure, at least to a degree, or maybe you had, the crazy, beautiful thing about Christianity, which is often mocked, is that people who have made total wrecks of their lives can find forgiveness and can sometimes make a fresh start. Isn't that what we want? Now, a fresh start is not like a first start. And sometimes if they gain wisdom from their mistakes, they can do better in their fresh start than they could in their first start. That's true too. Can't we be honest about all the truths? So, no, it's a great question, Cassidy. But I don't know that you should kiss dating goodbye. I don't know that dating is the best way to find a mate. Both of those things are true. Can't we say them both? See, and we live in a culture that doesn't want to afford that kind of honesty. And that's what I really have a problem with. So, wow, we've talked about this kind of stuff for the full first hour. Maybe we should change the subject. Christian Golden. Though we often say you reap what you sow, the actual scripture says, as you sow, so shall you reap. Yeah, good point. It seems to me that there's a significant difference in connotation here. You reap what you sow seems to imply something like you get what you deserve. Yeah. On the other hand, as you sow, so shall you reap seems to imply something more akin to what you output impacts the input that comes your way. That's really interesting. This does not mean that you only get what you deserve. After all, God causes it to rain on the just and the unjust. That's right. Also, we've been offered the gift of Christ, being a gift that we don't deserve. Question: do we, in some cases that I'm not grasping, in fact, always get what we deserve? No, we don't. We certainly don't. This is why I am a skeptic of karma. And this comes out a little bit in my sermon this week. Karma is sort of the first draft of religion. And someone just pointed me to a video of a Jewish scholar in Israel who was talking about Job, and he was exactly right. If you read, so let's say certain passages in Deuteronomy, it says very clearly, if you obey the covenant, then God will reward you. And if you fail the covenant, then God will punish you. That's true. If you read the book of Job, it expands the purview and says, but you can't just definitely distill the mind of God by looking at whether outcomes are desirable or undesirable. Again, both those things are true. And that, I think, in many ways, the story of Jesus accentuates the story of Job. Because Jesus, and I got into this with my videos about Peugeot and Peterson, if you do everything you should do, don't expect this world to necessarily celebrate and reward you. It won't. That's deep in the story of Jesus. So Jesus, according to the story, similar to Job, Job is the best perfect man who ever lived. There he is. He's right there. And this Jewish scholar lays out the case, and he makes a great case. And then Job's life falls apart. And Job's friends walk in and say, you certainly deserve it. And Job's like, where have I deserved it? Well, you must deserve it because things are going badly. And the Bible says, you can't do that math. And that's basically what God comes in at the end of the book of Job and says, you can't do that math. You don't know enough. That's sort of what cognitive science is telling us. So we don't get what we deserve. We don't. How does this reconcile with justice? This world is not a just world. Mao got away with it. Stalin got away with it. Hitler got away with it. Pol Pot got away with it. Please tell me what kind of judgment could be meted out upon Chairman Mao for the crimes he inflicted on how many different people? Chairman Mao didn't have enough life left for justice to be meted out on him. Would an execution be just? Would a beating and then an execution be just? I mean, how on earth can you balance those scales? Those scales can't be balanced in this world. I don't know how they could. And so even from a psychological point of view, it seems reasonable that human beings would derive an imaginative system by which the scales of justice are balanced by the gods or by God. That's basic religion. You can find it in the Book of the Dead in Egypt. You can find it all across the way in very, very many different religions. This world does not afford justice, and we can't mete it out. We can't even approximate it very well, because every time we try to, so we've had in California, they finally caught this old dude who was doing all this raping and murdering back in the 60s and 70s. And the dude finally gets caught. He finally stands trial. He's going to serve the rest of his days in jail. I think he was a former cop. But he's already in his 70s. And so, okay. And I'm sure he's annoyed by being in jail. I'm sure he'd rather be living someplace else. But, they're going to keep him away from the general population because it wouldn't be just to just throw him to the wolves, or would it? We can't answer these questions. We can't answer these questions to our satisfaction. And so let me put on the garb of an atheist and say, so we have imagined story by which there is a being that can finally balance the scales. There you have a God. And say, okay, well, I'll apply the ontological argument. So there's a being that we can imagine that can finally bring justice to the story of the human race. Too bad that being doesn't exist. Wouldn't it be better if that being would? Wouldn't you probably be a better person in this world if you actually believed in that being? Miroslav Volf, in his really excellent book, Exclusion and Embrace, goes into this. And there's a quote out of that book that it's on my blog, and I use it almost constantly. And he makes the point that what happened in the dissolution of the communist Yugoslavia, you had a whole bunch of atheists running around trying to bring justice. And you know what they got? A bloodbath. They got everything but justice. Why? It's the same story that you see at the beginning of the Godfather movie. The beginning of the Godfather movie, there's a guy who comes to the Godfather and his daughter was abused by a guy. And the undertaker, I think he was an undertaker, he comes to the Godfather and says, on the wedding day of your daughter, would you please do me this favor? Go kill this guy who abused my daughter. The Godfather, not a paragon of morality, says to the guy, you're not asking for justice. You're asking for vengeance. Plus, you've never really been my friend. You're only coming here because you need something. Now, there are levels of duplicity in that too, because that's how the Godfather works. And we see that clearly in the story. So then the guy grovels and says, then give me justice. And so the Godfather sends his goons out and they beat up the guy. They don't kill him because killing him wouldn't be just. And the Godfather doesn't want to extend himself because they'd get more heat from the law if the guy shows up dead. But they beat the guy up, and basically it's the Godfather's form of justice. We'll beat the guy up. This guy's never going to touch your daughter again. And in fact, other men in the community are going to respect your daughter because they're afraid of me. There, justice. Happy? No, we're not. In the former Yugoslavia, well, we don't expect there to be a God who does justice to this world, to the story of this world. So we're going to go out there and we're going to do it ourselves, which is exactly why the Bible says, justice is mine, says the Lord. I will repay. Because if he is the one repaying, we don't get blood on our hands. And we can look at our adversaries and say, God have mercy on you. Because Chairman Mao, you may have died the top dog in China, but when you pass from this world, you're about to face someone that you can't talk your way out of. and no lawyer will go to bat for you, and you have to face justice. So, people dismiss the Christian story how many different ways, but basically the entire system affords a hope that there can be justice in this world, or at least justice for the victims of this world. And part of the reason I'm so skeptical about any ideology that promises justice in this world, well, we can sort of approximate it sometime. And so I'm happy that rapist is going to be spending the rest of his days in jail. Is that justice? That's an approximation. It's getting there. It's, again, sort of like my purity answer. It's better than letting them out, but I want to believe in real justice. And I believe that God is a God of justice, and he is a God of mercy, and he will get that balance right. And if I can believe that, let's say such and such rapist is listening to this right now because he's got all time in his hands, so he's sucking down those PVK videos. And I get this letter in the mail next week from San Quentin or wherever he's at. Says, Pastor, I'm the rapist you talked about. I'm feeling guilty. Could you come and visit me? And I would. And I would say, turn your life over to Jesus. And someone would say, how could such a man, why could such a man find forgiveness now that he's caught, now that he's in jail, find forgiveness in the arms of Jesus? And I would have to say, I don't know. But David was a killer. Moses was a killer. The Apostle Paul was a killer. You're a killer too. My advice for you is cry out to Jesus. What God will do with you, that's God's business. I give it to him. And I believe that what he will do will be right. So that's where I go with this justice stuff. All these things you're all triggering little sermons from me. So anybody want to tell me I'm full of crap? Or nuance what I said?
No, that was beautiful. That's all
that
I
was
gotta
perfect.
say. Beautiful. Beautiful.
All right, let's keep going. Jacob. Oh, Jacob. Such a tricky guy. How do we know our place in the body? Capital B. If the whole body were an eye, where were the hearing? Boy, I love it when Jacob quotes Paul of Tarsus. That just makes my day.
He co-wrote that book with somebody else. I don't think that was him.
Yet it seems to me that the people we need most to be the head resign themselves to being the tuchus. All right, so Jacob wants me. Jacob likes to push me up the hierarchy and wants me to be less demure and more forceful in. Well, how would you? Okay, Jacob, this is your chance. Tell the whole Discord server and my channel how I need to what I need to do to really fulfill my mandate.
Like I've said before, anybody who wants to lead shouldn't be allowed to. So what the rest of us should be doing is looking for the people who don't want to lead, the humblest, like Moses, and we should be trying to propel them forward.
What does that have to do with me?
Nothing. You're supposed to be humble, Paul.
Good. Case closed. I love it when you quote Paul, even if you think it was a ghostwriter. I don't know though. That's First Corinthians. Almost all the New Testament scholars take First Corinthians to be Pauline.
It clearly says he wrote it with somebody else. Text itself says he wrote it with somebody else, and surprisingly, this is one of those things I can't quote to Christians from Jewish theology because it is a part of Jewish theology that's not in the scriptures. And then I encounter it in Paul, for God's sakes. How that happens.
Okay, so I continue to take Jacob's admonition, and any of you that want to share my videos with anyone who will tolerate them, you make me happy doing it, and I'm happy to be your servant. So, all right, Max of Meaning. Can one be a faithful Christian while maintaining a practice of breathing exercises sourced from the Hindu tradition? I've discovered a routine that's helpful in altering my physiological state by relaxing my body and refocusing my attention. It has no explicit mythos, and I'm tempting to commune with any gods. Jordan Peterson found similar benefits under Wim Hof's tutelage. Have other traditions done a better job than Western Christianity as discovering somatic temperance practices? Is Jesus in competition with that moment of nothingness I experience in meditation? This is a really good question. Let's say, for example, I discovered humility from a non-Christian tradition, or submission. Submission is very big in Islam. And I listened to Islam and I learned submission. Submission is also big in Christianity. There are practices that are around there, that are out in the world, that have been discovered by other religious traditions and brought to us. This sort of gets into really the purity question, because how can I answer this? This is a hard question to answer. We have an issue with labels right now. When Jordan Peterson tells Sam Harris, "You're not really an atheist," he's really making a label challenge. And Tom Holland does a similar thing when he notes that, gosh, you don't really get democracy from Athens. Athens has something that looks like democracy for us, but if you look at what the Athenians thought of their democracy, what justified it and constructed it, it's way different from American democracy, which seems to be more constructed upon the book of Genesis and the Imago Dei in all of us. Let me make another example. You're sort of hard pressed to arrive at capitalist democracy from the Bible. And now I just irritated a whole bunch of people because, Paul is being his leftist self again. The Bible isn't terribly democratic. The Bible is much more monarchical. And that would make Jonathan Peugeot smile, because in one conversation I had with him, he kind of had to admit he was a monarchist. Well, that's good. He's got a queen. It's a parliamentary monarchy, but he still has a queen. I don't. We Americans have presidents. So democracy, you're sort of hard pressed to find a justification for democracy in the Bible. I personally think democracy is a good form of government. Along the lines, especially in Protestantism, democracy sort of became the favored Christian state. Where does democracy come from? Does it come from the Greeks? Does it come from the Imago Dei? Where does it come from? We have, I look at people who are, we have to get rid of, Christianity, because Christianity has been the source of patriarchy and white supremacy. I'm skeptical. Although I also find it hilarious when people decry patriarchy and they binge on Korean soap operas. Korean soap operas are full of patriarchy. If you want to look at a patriarchal society, look at Korea. It's very patriarchal. We're all over the map with a lot of different things. And so, whereas I can understand Christians legitimately being cautious about practices from other traditions, I think that requires discernment, because democracy is a practice that comes from, we're not quite sure where. Capitalism is a practice that comes from, we're not quite sure where. And we can make Christian justifications for it. If you're really about purity, you should probably not use any products created by mass manufacturing because of the taint of Henry Ford. How you going to live? So, yeah, I think it's a good question. And I think as a Christian, you have to show discernment. And if you'd say, okay, Pastor Paul, show me a Bible verse that enforces that kind of discernment. Well, if we want to play that game, I'll go all the way back to the Old Testament, and I'll go to the story of Elisha, and I always get Haman and Naaman mixed up. I think Naaman, the Syrian general who Elisha heals because of the advice of a servant girl that Syrian general probably took and maybe abused on a raid of Israel. And he says to Elisha, when I have to go into the temple with the king and I have to bend a knee so that the king can bend a knee, and I don't think he's just talking literal physical, he's basically saying, hey, look, I'm stuck in a kingdom where, by virtue of my political service, I have to bend a knee to a pagan god. And I am conflicted about this because I'm indebted to your God who healed my leprosy and convinced me of my stubborn bullheadedness by the testimony of the slaves that I robbed from your people and his people. Gosh, what a mess. Nothing pure about this whole picture. And he says, now what happens when I have to basically worship this other God? And Elisha says, go in peace. What does that mean? And I think at a level, we sort of understand what it means. And if we can understand what it means, God can understand what it means. Now, again, I flip another side of my brain and says, you can justify anything with that way of thinking. Yeah, you probably can. I think the heart of it is that God knew Naaman's heart. God knew Naaman's situation. And God knows only God can judge. And so we give God our messed up lives and we say, Lord, I can't make heads or tails of this crazy world. If I drive a car, I'm participating in the colonial destruction of Henry Ford. That perhaps, if the environmentalists are correct, I'm participating in the destruction of this planet by the production of 21 pounds of CO2 for every gallon of gas I burn. And maybe 2 centuries from now, I will be viewed as someone worse than we view a slave owner 2 centuries ahead of me. I am hopelessly caught up in this world of compromising guilt. And that's why I lay down my burden before Christ and I say, I am not righteous. Can you make me clean? That's why I'm a Christian. So, yeah, I'd say, you're wrestling with good questions, and keep wrestling and do your best and seek counsel and wisdom and offer your sacrifices to the Lord for your forgiveness, and trust that Jesus is smarter than we are and can cleanse us from all unrighteousness.
Man, Paul, you're snapping back hard from Atheist Week.
Paul Vanderclay, too nice to liberals and atheists. All right. Okay, recently, John had a conversation with another conservative Christian about whether we should use someone's preferred pronouns when they do not align with a person's biological sex. She is for biological male, not made up like Zer. This is in person and professional settings, where, unlike Jordan Peterson, we don't have a status rocket waiting, and the consequences for misgendering someone are increasingly dire. I come down on the side of no, because I believe we should not be using language to endorse falsehood. That is, living not by lies. And that part of loving your neighbor is incarnating the logos, truthful speech, when talking with them, without being blunt or a jerk about it, obviously. It's not necessarily obviously, but rightly. My friend argued that it might be permissible to use preferred pronouns in order to help the person be open to Christ's love in our words and actions. And that being strict about pronouns could be using English language too legalistically. How do faithful Christians best love their neighbors in a situation like this? Is this a hill Christians should be willing to die on, or should be worried about more important issues? I hope this isn't too political. It's not too political. These days, unfortunately, the politics is invading every other aspect of our lives. It's true. There is a value in being a legalist. Part of what has held the Jewish community together is their dogged determination to not bend on certain things. There's value to that. There's also a downside to that. I think you should use as best you can discernment with a question like this. On an interpersonal level, my preference tends to be use the pronoun that the person would desire, just out of expressing a degree of generosity towards the person. It seems a small thing to ask. I understand Peterson's initial complaint on principle, and Peterson is a principled guy, that, the state shouldn't compel speech. I think that's a really good point. And so people should at times draw a line in the sand and not be moved on a principle. And if nobody ever does that, we don't learn anything. So there are times and places for that. These things are complex, and the culture can work different ways. There is a sense in which I deeply respect G-D. They're not even going to say, you see, in my opinion, saying God and Adonai are not that different. But I deeply respect someone who takes a stand. And again, you find these commonalities in Jesus. Jesus is sometimes so absolutely obstinate with some people that we look at him and say, what a jerk. Why wouldn't he be generous to that Canaanite woman? Other times, he's so astoundingly generous. This sinful woman, when we read Sinners, again, I'm already foretelling the sermon I have to record later today. When we read Luke 15 and we read about Jesus being nice to sinners, post 1960s and 70s, certain progressivist Christians say, oh, look, Jesus is nice to gays and sexual sinners. He was. He was also said the kind of things he said in the Sermon on the Mount. He did both of those things. And so at some point, someone might say, hey, wait a minute. If Jesus was so nice to these people who collaborated with the enormously unjust and pagan system the Romans and the Greeks were perpetuating on the Jewish people who were their victims, why would Jesus side with Rome? That's what everyone is angry about. Why Jesus would eat with tax collectors. And we say, oh, that's so good. Oh, that's just because Jesus' rivals aren't our rivals. It's Jesus eats with the woke, or Jesus eats with the patriarchal white supremacists, in to whatever degree we want to point that label around. Jesus eats with sinners. And we're offended. And the only way to square it is to say, Jesus is above all this. Well, who could be above all this? Only the God who finally has to judge between it all. So I would say, do your discernment, ask good questions, find a few things in your life you're going to be really, that are really central for you, and you can justify it, and you can stick to it without really hurting, in many cases, the weak. We live in such a strange society, though, because as you say, I mean, I have a tremendous amount of pity, and people will not like the fact that I use that word. I'll use compassion. I have a tremendous amount of compassion for someone for whom their biological sex does not seem to match up with their gendered experience. That would be horrible. Can I make their life a little better by using the pronoun of their choice? It doesn't seem like a small gift to ask. And so I generally will, because now they might turn on me and say, I don't need your stinking pity. Oh, okay. Okay. I won't give it to you then. So, the Lord has given us brains to understand contexts. Always try to err on the side of love. And you're exactly right. Sometimes love might be, in a particular case, saying, I'm not going to use that pronoun because I'm not going to participate in, after we have the level of relationship that we have with each other. I think that's destructive. Let's put it in a different context. Let's imagine you've got a really good friend who is making a really bad marital choice, and they invite you to the wedding. Are you going to go or not go? And in a sense, by going, you condone the wedding, and you think it's the worst thing that they could possibly do. By not going, you betray the friendship, and you, in a sense, step out of the place that, if in fact it all comes crashing down, they're going to need you. People are in these kind of places all the time. And I think this question is a question like that. And I think it's in some ways problematic that we blow everything up, which is what you said at the end, into a culture war issue, when we should emphasize and prioritize the personal.
I hate to constantly be butting in, but regarding the trans issue, I know a lot of trans people. I have a lot of trans. As an insurance broker, one of the things I do is help trans people because they have special needs. And I have to say that the divide between the trans person who is out there pushing their transness and trying to get you to say all kinds of weird pronouns, and most of the trans people I know, which are people who are trying to pass, therefore, and a lot of them do actually pass. That's the thing that people often don't get is, um, and most of them are just incredibly private people who don't want anybody noticing anything about their life that is different, and they're just trying to live their life
Yep.
passionately,
Yep.
and that's it.
Yep. Yep. I don't know how many of you noticed that I had a trans person on my channel and for a couple of talks. I don't know if both of them got posted, but your experience is exactly mine, Jacob. And Peterson says the same thing. And so that's part of the reason I'm very cynical about all of this. One of the things that really pains me is the beating that the word justice has taken in the last 10 years. Everybody's standing up for justice. Okay. I'm cynical. Justice is really hard.
It's because I think justice is out on its own. It's alienated from truth, mercy, love, wisdom. It needs to be held in tension with its other brother and sister virtues. It's not doesn't exist by itself, you know.
Oh, great point. See, this is why we do this on the Discord server. You guys make my answers better. All right, Nick Freerillian. I know you're going to have to get into The Bachelor some at some point. Talk about Paul Vanderklay's moral compromise, his television habits. Ah! PVK, I've been watching The Bachelor as well for my wife so I can keep the man card. Anyway, if you had a daughter on the show who made it to the final four, would you participate in getting to know the family portion of the show? Oh, gosh. And what would you say to your daughter and The Bachelor in your talks with them? I look at those parents and that part of the show, and it's like, oh, does my heart go out to you? Because, you know, their daughters and sons are adults. They're making their own choices. And one of the things that you realize as your kids become young adults is they're making their own choices. And you gotta, it's tough. It's so interesting. I once had a conversation with a therapist who was saying there's scads of books out there for parenting of children and teenagers. There's nothing out there for being a parent of an adult. And the issues are really complex. So I think about that question actually a lot, Nick. And I wonder how would I be, because you see lots of different parents on there. But we're also seeing the edited version that the show is making. And you have to remember with that show, they're making a TV show for ratings. That's what they do. Their primary motivation is not that these extraordinarily high status, beautiful people will find love. Their track record is horrendous. They're making dramas. And it's so funny because when I watch that show and the music swells, I just keep thinking of the Truman Show. And I think, gosh, what a sick culture we have. And here I am participating in it. Woe is me. So I don't know if you're in the room, Nick. Yeah, you are. I don't know if you can talk. But there it is.
Yeah, I mean, I have lots of different bachelor thoughts of my own that I can't bring into good articulation right now. But there's just so many interesting. You know, you pointed out the gender stereotypes on that show are so pronounced. Like the show that's attempting to fight for like equality and justice, the racial stereotypes play out way more than they did in the 1950s. You know, yeah. It's fascinating on several fronts. And I try not to be too cynical and tell my wife every time. I try not to point out every time they're clearly manipulating reality, because then she can't enjoy it. She just tells me to shut up. So it's been a really interesting watch, and I do often wonder, like, what the heck would I say, man? If I was in that situation. So
yeah. No, that's right. And I was just talking to Rick this morning. I said, in this society that's all about equity, what's sort of the main genre of television show out there? Lately we watch Ink Master. I don't have any tattoos. I never want a tattoo, but it sure is interesting seeing what these people can do with tattoos. And all of these shows, whether it's an English baking show or Ink Master or The Bachelor, it's all about establishing a hierarchy. These shows are all about hierarchy. And no, this is about equality. Well, then why is the show fundamentally driven by hierarchy? And, thank goodness you don't have a guillotine just outside the front door. But, everyone who doesn't get a rose is dismissed to outer darkness. I'll never find love. Are you kidding me? If you made it on this show, you are in the top 10%, unless you're one of those people that they always seem to bring on who are probably failed the psych exam and they're just on there to make one heck of a mess and get the gossip going. Because I would dare bet in the application process, they put the people through psych exams and they're psychologically profiling these people. And they set up just enough people that are of just enough, the right personality that they are going to cause drama, because that show, just like every other reality TV show, it's all about the drama. And it's a hoot. It's a hoot. So, all right, Lance, go ahead.
I just want to say really quickly that the Romans did decadent circuses in their societal collapse much better than we do.
We got nothing on the Romans. All right, Lance. I haven't been in the open studio much this week. It's just been a busy week. Had classes this week. Lance, I love this show, and thanks for taking my question. What are your thoughts on men blaming their wives for their own questionable choices in TV shows? I'm going to tell you something. When I pick the TV show, my family flees the television room. Because I'm watching stuff nobody else in the house wants to watch. So if I want to have some relaxation time with my wife and my daughters, I turn over the remote and I'll watch what they want to watch. And you learn to like it. Maybe it's towards my moral corruption. I don't know, but I have to make a choice and I want to spend time with my wife and my daughters. And so we watch The Bachelor and Ink Master. But when my son Jared comes over, then we're going to watch Oak Island. Curse of Oak Island. There's my favorite show. Even though that's go ahead.
I was gonna say, at least you don't have the curse of having to have Hallmark Channel movies on constantly.
Oh, I've seen plenty of those. They make me laugh. It's just the hard thing is I have to keep my mouth shut because I have an inner troll and they're so easy to troll.
They really are. I should stop using highly derogatory language when my wife brings them on. The word porn may get flown around a little bit. It's female porn. That's what it is. That's all.
That's what it is. That's what it is. Do you think it is mere insecurity or evidence of deep emotional problems? Probably both. Also, which Jordan Peterson rule do you think would help such men? Rule number 1, stand up straight, or rule number 6, quit blaming other people? Oh, Lance. Oh, that's fun. All right, what do we got? 15 minutes left. Oh boy. Any of these questions that any of you in the voice chat put in that you really want me to answer?
I really want to answer my question, Paul. Hopefully.
Okay, Mark. Well, and you and I got to talk. You and I got to, Nate sort of called you out on Twitter, and I said, hey, let's maybe have Mark and Nate in a room, in a Zoom room together, and let's talk instead of fighting. So we can talk about that later. So where's your question? I'm scrolling up and down.
I can read it for you.
Oh, there it is. Okay. I would like to know about the leap of faith. How important is it? What exactly do you think it is? When do we know we are at that point? That's a great question. Well, of course, it's a metaphor. And I think it is a pretty good metaphor. And you can find all sorts of examples of it in the New Testament. For example, I mentioned in the video I released this morning in my men's group, we had the story in the Gospels of Jesus and the Canaanite woman in Matthew 15. And this is a very controversial story today. If you Google that story, people are like, Jesus is a racist. Jesus is misogynistic. Jesus calls that woman a dog, yada, yada, yada. And they don't get to the end of the story where Jesus applauds the woman for her great faith. And we see Jesus doing that to a centurion at one point. And so what happens in that story? People basically, I think, abandon their own resources and begin to, how can I say this? Begin to allow the Spirit of Christ to work through them. This gets into the Jacob wrestling with God question we had last week. Jesus pushes that Canaanite woman who's got a daughter who's severely possessed by a demon, however you want to categorize that. Jesus pushes her by ignoring her. And then Jesus looks her square in the eye, uses, calls her a metaphorical dog. And Jesus pushes her until she finally, exhibits the fact that, Jesus, you can call me anything you want. I'm not giving up on you. I'm getting out of the boat, and if I walk on water or sink, you are my plan. I think that is the leap of faith. And I think it is important. And now it's really hard with these kinds of things because there are all sorts of fool's gold around them, like passivity. The Canaanite woman is not passive. Peter getting out of the boat is not passive. Peter says to Jesus, bid me come to you. And Jesus is like, all right, get out of the boat. He gets out of the boat. He starts looking at the waves. He starts to sink. Help me. Jesus takes his hand, says, why did you look at the water, Peter? Why didn't you look at me? And, so I started reading Peterson's book, and right on in the first chapter, it's a lovely, I don't know why Peterson is so controversial when he writes so much common sense. He points out in a really loving way, he's got a granddaughter. What an awesome thing. And his granddaughter is learning to point. And Peterson notes that pointing it's something so simple for us, we don't pay any attention to it, but it's really important. And so Peterson has a little section in the chapter about his granddaughter pointing. And what this leap of faith basically is Jesus says, similar to what Peterson said with Pajot, orient your life around me. Start trusting in me. And there's actually lots of different ways we do it. We can do it by study, by reading the Gospels thoroughly and reading the Bible thoroughly and trying to get a sense of all of that complexity that the Bible is. We can do it in prayer. We can do it with the church. There's lots of different ways we can do it. So I think it is, and actually, if you look at this dynamic, there's a lot of other ways that you can articulate it in a fairly secularish way. And it has to do with humility. I even listening to Tammy Peterson in that last 15 minutes that she had with Michaela, where lots of long, very purity driven, picky Christians might pick apart some of what Tammy said and some of her practice, yada, yada, yada. But the heart of what Tammy was saying is, I learned through my cancer, not my will, but yours be done, which is both the prayer of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane and the prayer of Jesus in the Lord's Prayer. So I don't know, Mark, what do you think?
Well, Paul, I must admit that I asked that question and then I saw the Peterson and Peugeot talk, and I went, I don't know what's going on with the world, but it's a very strange place. And as I also mentioned, I was listening to your commentary on that talk while I was driving up to Charlotte when I got my acupuncture, and then went over to find out about what the Billy Graham Library was about, because I'd passed it a million times and I heard you talk about that. And so I don't know what to make of the fact that my question was answered on this particular week. But it seems like Peterson, for example, and I suspect many others, are at some point where this is an important question for them, and it's this Cartesian rubric of, how do we know, or how would somebody know when someone else is there, right? Or how do you know for yourself that you're at a point where you have to do something that we refer to as a leap of faith, and what does that mean? And I like this humility thing a lot. It's been a big topic of discussion in the meditation talks we do on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord server every day, and it's interesting that you brought that into it, because I hadn't considered that aspect. But it just seems like a really important question if you're taking seriously the sort of concept that I think you're laying out. Forgive me if I'm misattributing this, but that if you get to the end of Peterson, where do you go next?
Yeah. Yeah. And here's an irony of a lot of what I've learned in the last 3 years from Peterson, and especially Vervaeke, is all of this cognitive science. And the heart of this cognitive science lesson is we're all too small for this world. This world is too big, and that scales at every level. And so John's relevance realization, which is a really clever way of taking all of this into 2 words that can be taken a couple of different ways, especially. What do we do with the fact that the world is big and we are small, and we have to act? And that's the human beings have to act. And as Peterson always says, you know, if you're going to cross the cornfield, how do you navigate? And well, you use relevance realization, and all of that is built in. And John, explicates all of these mechanisms and all of that cognitive science. But to live in this world, you have to act, and to swing full back to, the matchmaking topic that we sort of started today with. If if you desire a lifelong partner, at some point you got to act. It might mean asking the girl out, it might mean taking a risk, it might mean all sorts of things, but it's a leap of faith. And the faith, it was interesting in that talk with Peugeot how many times Peterson talked about losing his faith, and it's like, faith in exactly what? And I would think it's very similar to Peugeot, because I think Peterson would say faith, a humble faith that taking taking a step of virtue and goodness out into the world has a chance of yielding goodness. So it's telling the truth, or at least not lying. It's doing what is meaningful and not what's expedient. It's and I think Peugeot would come in and say the reason the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament are what they are is because of the Christian assertion. Well, we struggle with proof, but the Christian assertion that the author of this world is finally good and just and true and right. So you might do the right thing and not be rewarded for it, but finally justice will be done. So ask the girl out, go on the diet, take up that physical hobby, read that book, speak the truth, even though you're going to get shellacked, maybe even by your own tribe, but speak the truth in love. So, and the faith that I think Peterson has implicitly is that if he's dragging that heavy cross up the hill, there's something good at the top. And that's, I think, the faith he's talking about. And that is the leap of faith, that we finally say, and you find it all over the Bible. Jonathan, what a figure Jonathan is in the Old Testament, son of Saul. Jonathan and his armor bearer they bump into a band of Philistines, and he kind of says, "Hey, let's take him on. You know, maybe we'll die, but let's try God and see if God would, give us the victory here." So that's, I think that's it. I think that's it.
Maybe what you're pointing to is the leap of faith is the aim in that highest good, in the greatest good, and we're taking it on faith that such a thing exists to
Yep.
be aimed at.
Yep.
And then we'll say, it's a big topic on our server, we're using our intention to act in the world and measure based on where we were, if we're in a better space. So to use the Peterson thing, if we're aimed at that brightest star or something like that. Does that sound correct?
Yes, yes. And the problem with nihilism is you can do this out of nihilism if you say, well, at least I've got my pride. But pride is about the skinny ledge, the only skinny ledge you have with nihilism, that the world owes me nothing, nothing matters, nothing will come of this. I'll just do the right thing out of pride. Oh, okay. I'd rather have you do the right thing than the wrong thing. But in a Christian world, you say, I may die, they may attack me, and I know that because Jesus did the right thing and they attacked him and he died. But I've got a reason to believe that this is worth it. And so then again, a Christian who believes in the resurrection says, because of that resurrection, they can kill me. And you see that reverberated throughout history. I look at Dr. King's civil rights movement, and you can abuse my body, you can take my freedom, but you can't make me hate you. Oh, that is powerful. That is so powerful. And it changed the world. So, all right. We have gotten to 2 hours, and Rick has the camera on him. So he just waved at me. Yes, Rick is real. Rick is real. So unless somebody has something they want to say on the live stream before I tell Rick to end transmission, now's your chance. Who voted for Kanye? Are you disappointed him and Kim are breaking up? They're always so quiet when the YouTube stream is on. All right, Rick, you can end transmission. Thanks for joining us today.